We begin tonight with the Middle East. The Lebanese cabinet decided today to send 15,000 Lebanese troops to the south of the country. But Israel's chief of staff said that its forces will remain there until a multinational force is deployed. Many issues remain unclear. Among them, the timetable, the composition of that force, and whether Hezbollah will disarm. Many Israelis are also questioning whether Israel accomplished its objectives. Joining me now is Israeli Foreign Minister Tzipi Livni. Earlier today, she met with UN Secretary General Kofi Annan and U.S. Ambassador to the UN, John Bolton. I am pleased to have her here at this table for the first time. Welcome.
Thank you.
Tell me what you hope for the future and what you worry about with respect to this ceasefire and this conflict that is now temporarily, hopefully longer, in ceasefire.
My hopes are to live in peace with Lebanon. I mean, there is no conflict between Israel and Lebanon. Israel withdrew its forces from Lebanon in 2000. We have the agreement of the international community saying that our forces deployed to the right line. But unfortunately, the situation is not normal. I mean, Lebanon is a state in which you have a government, but side by side with the government, there is a terrorist organization which has its own arms, but it is also a coalition partner in the Lebanese government.
Was elected to the parliament. Was
elected. So this is not a normal situation, and we faced a situation in which Israel was attacked, unprovoked attacked, from Lebanon to Israel, but Israel tried to target Hezbollah, which targeted Israel in order not to undermine the Lebanese elected government. So it is a very complicated situation. And I hope that in the future, the situation will be more normal. I mean, two states, two sovereign states. One is Israel, the other is Lebanon, living side by side in peace. It is possible, but the situation now is complicated.
But can Israel live side by side with Lebanon, with international troops in the south, as long as Hezbollah has missiles that can land on Israel's soil?
Now, of course, the idea and the goal, not only of Israel, but of the international community, is to dismantle Hezbollah. This is not new. This is not a new goal. It was stated and established in United Nations Security Council Resolution 1559 from 2004, but it was not implemented because the Lebanese government is too weak to implement Security Council resolution. This was the reason why Israel suggested that this time it is needed not only that the Lebanese army will deploy, or the government will deploy its forces to the south, but there's a need that it will be helped by the international community in order to make it easier to the forces to strengthen the Lebanese army in order to dismantle Hezbollah in the end of the road. I think that this is a matter of process.
That Hezbollah will be dismantled, that they will, in fact, be disarmed.
This is the goal. As I said before, this is the task not only of Israel, but of the international community.
Let me interrupt you to say a couple...
I'm not naive, I mean, if you are going to ask me, but I'm not naive. But I think that it is important that this will be the goal at the end of the process. We cannot take it aside.
Do you believe that as of now, Israel accomplished the objectives it went to war for?
It's too early to say, and time will tell. I mean, the idea was not only a military operation. I think that this is a war of three phases. One was the military operation, then the other was the diplomatic war, and the United Nations Security Council 1701 that was adopted a few days ago is an Israeli achievement, I believe. But then the real question is the implementation of the Security Council resolution. So we achieved on the military field, we weakened Hezbollah. On the diplomatic field, we achieve a resolution which represents the Israeli interest, and I believe that these are the interests of the region. But yet the big question is whether this resolution is going to be implemented. If it's going to be implemented, so we won, this is a victory, and Hezbollah lost.
Everything I read says the following to me, that there is great political debate in Israel.
Yes.
Some of the things that they are saying is, number one, that the expectations going in were too high. Number two, that there is a feeling that the government and the military had not concluded what they could do and should do. Number three, there is this feeling, and former Prime Minister, former Finance Minister Netanyahu is articulating this. Okay. You smile.
Yeah.
And that there
I'm
is
a former
about
member of the Likud. So.
I know you are. And he's now the leader of the Likud and
Yes.
clearly wants to be Prime Minister in the
Yes.
worst way. Is your country going through a kind of very difficult soul-searching right now as to
yes.
what this...
Yes, people are frustrated in Israel. This is not a secret. And Israel is a democracy, and I'm sure that questions are being asked, and questions will be asked in the future.
What are those
and
questions?
It is, what were the goals of the operation, about the decisions that we've made in the cabinet, about the functioning of the army and the forces and the reserve forces.
Yeah. Whether they were equipped to do the job is the thing that they're asking.
Yes, this is part of the questions. And as I said, Israel is a democracy, and I believe that part of being a democracy is being criticized. Yeah. And it is more than legitimate to ask questions. But I think, and we'll have to answer it, but it's too early to speak about it right now because the operation is not over yet, not the military operation, nor the process. So the question whether we achieved our goals, it's not the answer is not only in the field of the military operation, but in general. And of course, I'm sure that we will find some mistakes in the future, and there are things that we can correct. But the goals, as part of a government, as part of as a decision
Sure.
maker, my expectations were not that high. I mean, my expectations from the army was to weaken Hezbollah, not to disarm them, because it's impossible.
But that is not the public perception of what the government wanted.
I know.
So had different expectations.
I know that. There is a difference, there's a gap
Sure.
between what I expected from the army to begin with and the expectations of the public. And it was also changed in terms, so during this month, it was changed. I think that it is clear that a military operation cannot bring back the hostages back home. It's not enough, a military operation. And knowing that, Israel decided knowingly to attack Hezbollah and not to attack the Lebanese government. This is a very complicated situation.
But the people that the Lebanese government represented suffered greatly.
Well, everybody.
And the Israeli people suffered greatly too,
Israelis and
Absolutely.
Lebanese suffered, but there was a strategic decision. We could have attacked Lebanon, and this could be an easy job in a way, because the Lebanese army is weak, and we could have targeted the infrastructure of Lebanon, and we were asked to by our chief of staff and the military forces.
They wanted you to do what? To go all out and declare war against Lebanon?
Against Lebanon, yes. And to hit the Lebanese infrastructure, electricity, water, and all the others. And we said, and we were asked.
But that would be madness, would it not? I mean, it would lead you, the entire country, into war with Israel, not just Hezbollah, and it would also lead other surrounding Arab countries to have to make a decision about what they would do.
So you're right. From a military perspective, this could have been an easier operation.
Exactly.
But we were responsible in a way, and we decided not to do it. And since the first day of the operation, we asked by the international community not to undermine the Lebanese government, and we accepted. So the operation became very complicated because it is very difficult to target Hezbollah members which are hiding within among civilian population in the south part of Lebanon, targeting Israel. And there's a difference because we were looking for, our forces were looking for the Hezbollah among the civilian populations and to target only the terrorists, while they were targeting Israeli civilian population centers in order to kill civilians. So it is two different battles from two different sides. And it is more complicated goal for an army to fight against guerrillas or terrorists and not against a state. So the goal is, you asked me at the beginning, what is the goal? The goal is to leave state and a state with a border, hoping that Lebanon will be a functioning state and not a state with weak government, with terrorist organization like militias. And maybe this is not only the future, but this is also the role of the international community to pressure, to put the pressure on Lebanon to change.
It has been said that you wanted to use diplomacy earlier.
Yes. Yes.
And
yes.
And the Prime Minister said, no, reined you in, said, I don't want you to go do that now. There's time later for talk after we achieve our military objectives.
Tough question in tough days. It is true that, as I said before, my expectations from the army were limited.
Right.
Since the beginning.
So you knew that you had this,
yes,
in the end would be a negotiation,
yes,
be a time for diplomacy, and
yes,
you wanted it to begin early rather than later.
Yeah. Yes, and more than that, I knew what are the goals that I want to achieve during this diplomatic corps, and the idea was to achieve arm embargo, to achieve the deployment of the Lebanese army to the south part of Lebanon, to achieve the establishment of an international force, robust, effective international force.
Right.
And this is now part of Resolution 1701.
But you believe also that if it had been done earlier, Israel would be in a much better place?
Yes.
You're very honest. What does this do about the viability of your job as foreign minister and a member of the cabinet in this government?
What do you mean?
Are you at odds with the Prime Minister so that it's unlikely that you will continue as foreign minister?
As I said before, we share the same goals. We had some differences about the best way to achieve these goals. And also Prime Minister almost, maybe at the beginning he was thinking that it's too early to begin with, with diplomacy, but at the end he supported all the diplomacy that I used, and he of course supported Resolution 1701. So we had our own differences, but this is part of being, as I said before, we are a democracy, and we can share the same goals, but we can have some differences about the best way to achieve them.
Let me ask you a question that's often asked here in this city. Will the Omer government survive?
I hope so.
I know you hope so. But it is in question, is it not?
As I said before, this is I came here only a few days after the Security Council adopted Resolution 1701. The situation now is sensitive, explosive in a way. I hope that the cessation of hostility will hold in the next few days, so it's too early to know. I hope that the government will survive, because this is totally new government. Yes. We are in position, I think, 3 or 4 months, only 3 months or 4 months. And I hope that we can come to the public and say openly, I mean, as I said before, you can criticize us, you can check, you can make inquiries about the way that we act during this war. But at the end of the day, we took the right decision, or we took the decision in order to give a better future for us all. It was from the right place to take decision, maybe. I'm not sure that I explained it.
You did. Well, Nasrallah is loudly proclaiming that Hezbollah won. That they survived. They won by surviving. They won by not being defeated.
So, as I said before, it is too early to know. And Nasrallah has to say it, because in terms of casualties and destruction, and the situation in Lebanon is difficult, and he has to say something to the Lebanese people.
But do you have evidence that he is weakened, that his ability to lead his people, whatever the significance of the numbers of Hezbollah is within the political structure of Lebanon, is weakened or strengthened?
His military ability was weakened during the military operation.
It had to be, sure.
Yes. The political question is now it's too early to know, because during a war, during a military operation against the people, people support their leaders. And Nasrallah is one of the Lebanese leaders. But now, after the operation,
right, exactly.
This is a time in which people will ask themselves, Israelis asking themselves
sure.
whether the Israeli government...
And so will Lebanese. Are we better off because...
Yes. And I think that at the end of the day, they will understand that Nasrallah is a burden, that Nasrallah represents the Iranian interest and not the Lebanese interest. They will understand that they have no conflict with Israel. And most of them, I mean, Lebanon was at the beginning of the tourist season, at the beginning of prosperity.
Sure. And they've been set back some 10 to 15 years,
ago,
people say.
Yes. So I think that they will get the understanding that his and Hezbollah is a burden. But I would like to add something else, which is more maybe relating to the issue of democracy and terrorist organization using democracies. We face the same situation also in the Palestinian Authority. In implementing democracy, there's a need to put some restrictions and conditions before entering to election. And terrorist organizations should decide before election whether they want to be terrorist organization, militia, armed militias, or they want to be a political party. And this choice should be put before the elections, because as we saw in the Palestinian Authority, the Hamas, which is a terrorist organization, won the election, and now we are facing a very complicated situation with the Palestinians. And my fear is that even though, and I'm sure, I hope, that the process will be of dismantling Hezbollah, anyway, deploying the Lebanese government to the side, arm embargo, but yet we have another concern. And this is now the political process in Lebanon. And as long as this, they can live both sides, I mean, as an armed militia and a political party, this is an ongoing threat, not only on Israel, but on the region.
You're essentially almost saying that because everybody is looking at the idea of democracy in the Middle East, it's part of the Bush administration's great drive and was a keystone of the president's second term. Go ahead.
No, I believe in democracy, but I think that the real essence and the real meaning of democracy is to put some conditions which are part of the democratic values.
If you want to participate and be elected, and you have to give up.
This is the meaning of democracy in Israel.
It is interesting, and lots of writers in America pointed out that that Hezbollah and Hamas had it both ways. They got their hands on government and did not have to give up their arms, so that it became Hamas arms or Hezbollah arms, not Palestinian arms or Lebanese arms. And as long as you have that, and they also will argue in some cases that, that it is, you don't know what the future of the democracy is after you've had this initial election where people who keep arms gain power. And
now, and continuing this comparison, we are facing two weak leaders, Senora and Abu Mazen. And now let's try to see the situation in Lebanon. I mean, Senora is a weak leader.
Prime Minister of Lebanon.
The Prime Minister of Lebanon. Now, he understands that he has to fight these militias. He has to dismantle them. This is part of the United Nations resolution. But when it is more easy to fight militias which are not your coalition partner than to fight militias which are also, that you need them to survive in your government.
So you seem to suggest the only way he can disarm Hezbollah is not to make them his coalition partner.
Yes. But on the other hand, he's too weak. So this is...
So how does he get strong enough in your judgment to be able to have a Lebanon and a Lebanese army that's strong enough to do the job it needs to do
he has to
rebuild the country?
He has to understand that he has no other alternative. I mean, Israel paid the price of his weakness. And this is also the role of the international community.
And the price it paid at having to go to war with the loss of its own people, as well as damage to its country, as well as some world opprobrium, as well as not destroying Hezbollah.
So now this is the role of the international community.
You think they can do it and will do it? Or are you just hopeful?
I think that they can do it. I'm not sure that they will do it. I hope so, but I'm not sure.
Do you believe that...
I'm not sure that the international the determination of the Lebanese government and the international community is strong enough. I hope so, anyway.
What do you think, and how do you measure, from your position and from your candor, how do you measure the Arab street and whatever the consequences were for this war, for enraging the opinion against Israel and against the United States? Was that a significant casualty, and does it matter?
I think that during the last month we could see a change in the Arab world. I think that the moderate Arab states, and especially the moderate Arab leaders, understand the threat that comes from Iran and from Hezbollah. But they are also facing some, internal demonstrations against Israel, and the public opinion is usually, like always, against Israel. So they have, on one hand, they cannot support a military operation against Hezbollah, but I think that they hope to see a change, and they are still hoping to see a change in Lebanon. And I think that it is important to Israel because we live in a neighborhood that it took us a long time to achieve a peace agreement with Egypt and Jordan. And we see the relationship between Israel and Jordan and Israel and Egypt as a strategic relationship. And we understand the difficulties that they face, the internal difficulties that they face from extremists in their own states. I mean, Muslim brothers in Egypt and in Jordan. So we are trying to work, I mean, to give them the possibility to live or to give the right answers also to the public in their own states. But on the other hand, I think that they understand that. I think that the two sides in this war is not Israel and Lebanon. But on one side, it is Israel, the Lebanese government or Senora, the international community, and moderate Arab states. And on the other side, it is Hezbollah and Hamas, Syria, Iran, and other extremists. And this is the right way to look at things. But unfortunately, sometimes because of internal political matters, they cannot be so strong on this issue.
Here's the interesting question, too, is that most people believe, and I assume you do too, that if in fact you could find a solution to the creation of a Palestinian state that was acceptable to you, Israel's national security, and to the Palestinians, it would go a long way to helping the conflict. My question. I assume you believe that, do you not?
Yes.
Everybody does. And everybody there. Has that effort been damaged by this war?
No, I don't think so. Why is that?
Because of the inflaming of opinion. Because, for example, the Syrians could help. If you could make a deal with the Syrians, that would enhance this, because they've always stood in the way, obviously.
Well, I think that the Syrian role is negative, but I don't think that they are so effective on the Palestinians right now. They are effective. I mean, they support the Hamas as a terrorist organization.
Well, not only that, the most radical Hamas is in Damascus.
Yes, he's in Damascus, and they are trying to take more negative role. They, I mean, in the last event of the first abducted Israeli soldiers, they took a very negative role, and they are hosting Hamas leaders as terrorists in Damascus. The situation between Israel and the Palestinians is complicated, especially after the elections in the Palestinian Authority and the fact that the terrorist organization won the elections. But this is not the only reason. And my hope is to reach or to achieve peace with the Palestinians, because I understand that time is working against those who believe in two-state solution.
Okay, but is it, and this is my question.
Okay, sorry.
No, you're perfect. I mean, I can't ask for more than. Has that effort been damaged by this? For example,
yes.
You know, Prime Minister Omer was in favor of the withdrawal from Gaza, was in favor of giving more, moving some settlements around,
yes.
and giving more land to the Palestinians. Is that a dead idea because of his weakness, because of the great debate over this war?
It's too early to say.
Okay.
I mean, my understanding is that stagnation is not an Israeli interest when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Right.
We would like to find a way to live in peace with the Palestinians. I believe that a Palestinian state is also an Israeli interest. The unfortunate fact doesn't relate to the situation in Lebanon, the weakness or the strength of the Israeli government.
It doesn't.
Not only. This is not only the only parameter. There's a need to find a partner, real partner on the Palestinian side. Now, without a partner, we were thinking that maybe we can take some steps in order to promote this vision of two-state solution. But any step, Israeli step, should take in consideration the Israeli interest, the legitimate Israeli interest, like security and others. So even right now, we are willing to take our forces out of several places which are now part of the territories, to dismantle more settlements. But of course, we cannot just throw the keys to the other side of the borders and hope for good. I mean, we are realistic enough. So it's too early to know what will be the impact, but we are not going to put it aside. We cannot afford it. It is our responsibility to find a way to promote this process, but on the other hand, to keep Israel's security.
Yeah, but I mean, those ideas had possibilities when Sharon was alive, before and then with Omer before this war. A couple of other things that I'm fascinated by. One, would you be willing to is this the time to have serious conversations with the Syrians, or has Assad's speech sort of caused everybody to get very upset? The German minister was going to speak to Assad. He decided not to go because of the speech.
Rightly so, yes.
Everybody's upset about the speech that he made.
I'm not surprised. I mean, upset from the speech. Assad is playing a very negative role. He supports terrorists. He's part of this axis of Hezbollah and Syria and Iran. Iran is using Syria, and Syria itself transfer arms to Hezbollah. I think that this is the wrong moment to embrace Assad.
So there's no reason to talk to him right now because...
No, I think that he's looking to take a new position and to strengthen himself as a leader. But he has to do something in order to gain the support of the international community. And until now, he did nothing.
He's just gaining the support of the Iranians.
Yes, but he gets the support of the Iranians because they don't share the same ideology, but they share the same interest, especially when it comes to the region and to existence or non-existence of Israel as a state. But he's trying to use this situation in order to be embraced by the international community without paying any price in order to be part of the international community, in order to share, I mean, He has to share the same values or understanding about the future of the region. And he has to understand that Lebanon, he had to leave Lebanon a few years ago, and he has to understand that he cannot control the life of the Lebanese, and he cannot control the Lebanon by using Hezbollah. So I think that this is the right message to send to Syria these days, and maybe in the future we can change it. But right now, he's in a kind of euphoria. He thinks that he's important, that everybody is looking for his, presence, to meet him, to embrace him, to say something about him. And I think that this is the right moment in which he has to understand that Lebanon has to take its own direction without his control in Lebanon.
Some say that Iran was the winner of all of this.
The winner?
Yes.
And why is that?
Well, because Hezbollah survived, because they flexed their muscle through Hezbollah, and because they detracted attention from the nuclear issue and all of that.
Well, the timing of the attack on Israel, I think, was connected to the fact that it was few days before the G8, and I think that Nasrallah wanted to get the public attention from the pressure on Iran.
And Nasrallah became an Arab hero.
As I said before,
right.
It's too early to judge. Please, let's wait. And of course, it doesn't depend on Israel. It depends on the seriousness and determination of the international community. And this is our expectation from the international community.
And it is your belief, and this is a question, that the moderate Arab countries, if moderate Arab is the right way to describe it, I'm talking about Egypt, I'm talking about Jordan, I'm talking about Saudi Arabia. In the beginning, it was said that they wanted to see Israel achieve its objectives in Lebanon. That's what it was said.
Yes.
And they said they sent this message publicly to a degree. Later, as Hezbollah began to capture the imagination of the Arab world, they backed off. Where are they now?
Well, I read some Arab expert commentators saying that after Resolution 1701 was adopted, that Israel won the diplomatic battle and achieved its goals. But it's, as I said before...
Too early.
No, I mean, let's see. If at the end of the day... a few months ago, we expected the Lebanese government to deploy its forces to the south. You mentioned Ariel Sharon before. Right. And my last working meeting with Ariel Sharon was about this issue. It was Wednesday, the day he was hospitalized, and he asked the former foreign minister to ask the international community to force Lebanon to deploy its forces to the south part of Lebanon. This was the goal. So this month, as part of, or maybe as part of the pressure that Israel put in its military operation, the Lebanese government decided to deploy its forces. This is one step. Small step for humanity, big step for the Lebanese government, maybe.
To quote a former astronaut.
But it is so important. And this is the reason why I came here today to the state, and was the reason for my meeting with Kofi Annan. There is a window of opportunity. If this window of opportunity will not be used by the international community with determination, and strongly demand the Lebanese government to implement its role and help and assist the Lebanese government with robust, effective international forces, so we are back in square one. But if it's going to be used, I think this is going to be also the right lesson and message to Iran, Syria, and all those extremists looking for Israeli or maybe Western failure in the regions.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you.
We'll be right back, and we'll talk to Charlie Gibson, who is the anchor of the new World News with Charlie Gibson. Stay with us.